shape to the greater body politic of humanity. And I began to realize, oh my God, there's like this malevolent force that's holographically encoded within the non-local field within our minds that actually is giving shape to what's playing out in the world. And the origin of that force is within us. And so that's when I began. So it was like I was tracking and making maps and beginning to illumine and articulate like a higher dimensional process that every spiritual tradition or visionary artists or philosophers or thinkers, they've all been pointing at exactly this. I mean, the apocryphal text calls it the counterfeiting spirit, and it's the source of the greatest evil. And this counterfeiting spirit that is WETIKO, it has no creativity at all, but it plugs into our unconscious creativity to the extent that we're not actually consciously expressing our creativity. It plugs into our creative spirit, which is our nature, and turns it against us in a way that creates a cocoon around us and suffocates us, in which we then collude in killing ourselves, which is exactly what we're doing. But what I'm pointing out in my work is that encoded in this seeming evil force, it's actually this revelation. It's actually helping us. Like you were saying, it's catalyzing our evolution. So it's like a quantum phenomena in a superposition of states that it contains both the deepest, darkest evil and the most sublime, highest blessing. And how this force manifests depends solely on if we recognize what it's revealing to us. And so this is my third book, the one that just came out on WETIKO, because, like Castaneda in the Castaneda books, Carlos's teacher talks about WETIKO. He doesn't have the name. He calls it the predator or other names. He says for shamans, this is the topic of topics. And that's completely right. There's nothing more important than understanding this, because if we don't understand this, then everything else is a moot point, because we're destroying ourselves. We're enacting collective suicide. And I'm just like, my whole work is shedding light on the nature of this mind virus and how it operates. You see, it's an inner disease of the soul that actually has a magical ability to synchronistically, to like somehow extend itself into the world and synchronistically configure events in the outer world so as to reveal and express itself. And what I just described, where the outer reflects the inner, that's a dream. And, to connect with the dreamlike nature. And, and what is the language of dreams? It's symbols. To really cultivate symbolic awareness, this is the way, as we establish ourselves in that realization that we're actually having a collectively shared dream, that point of view is the very perspective that dissolves WETIKO. So that's just a little intro.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to go wherever you want to. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this whole kind of notion of like a type of awakening, I over the years, and especially over the last 3 years, it's almost like there's an outer awakening and then there's an inner awakening. So you can kind of wake up to the external conspiracies and 9/11 and pandemics and all of the JFK and all of that. These are all kind of external manifestations of a conspiracy. What I was always more interested in, and this is one of the reasons why I got into Gurdjieff, was that he was more concerned about the inner conspiracy. And he had a term which is always kind of a mystery to all of the students and probably all of the readers of Gurdjieff, and it's a thing called the organ kunda buffer, which he said was implanted into humanity to make the world topsy-turvy or inverted, or not to see reality as it truly is. So what I was going to ask you is, with regards to WETIKO, so what we're saying is WETIKO is something that is within. It's like an inner virus, and then it's projected out into the world. So we're basically creating this kind of topsy-turvy clown world.
Yeah. Well, the thing about WETIKO, one of the ways it works, one of its strategies, is to distract us, where we put our attention outside, thinking the problem or the solution is outside. And what I'm pointing out in my work is we intrinsically have this creative genius. That's our nature. I wrote a book on quantum physics where I point out that quantum physics, and it's actually offering the medicine for WETIKO. that it's actually showing us the incredible creative agency that we are creating our experience each and every moment. No one else is doing that. We are doing that by the way we interpret the waking ink blot and place meaning on our experience. And the point is that we, each of us, inherently have this unbelievable creative power. But to the extent that we're not aware of it, one can conceive of this mind virus as plugging in to that creative agency and turning it against us. So like one very simple way of understanding this, say you're in a dream. So why don't we invoke the imagination for a second? And if you're in a dream and you're holding whatever perspective in a dream, well, what is a dream? It's a reflection of the mind. So the dream will instantaneously reflect back, giving you all the evidence, confirming the objective truth of your viewpoint. Well, so now you have evidence that what you're seeing is objectively true. So you become more fixed in that viewpoint, and the more fixed in that viewpoint, the more the dream, which is just a projection, reflects back, confirming the seeming truth of your viewpoint in a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is your own mind. And you've basically entranced yourself, you've hypnotized yourself by your own creative genius. That's what I'm pointing at. You see, the thing about WETIKO, it's so trippy because on the one hand, it doesn't even exist. There is no such thing as WETIKO. If you hear about a mind virus and they get all afraid, no. WETIKO feeds off of fear. There is no such thing as WETIKO. But if we don't shed light on it and understand it, it'll kill us. You see, that's the paradox. And that's pointing at the incredible, untapped, unconscious creative power that each of us have by our nature. And the thing about WETIKO, you see, it only has power over us to the extent that it's not seen. And that's why I'm continually contemplating it from omni perspectives, from as many points of view as I can imagine, to help people to see how it's operating through outer events, reflecting the inner psyche, and and it also operates through our unconscious reactions and triggers and all that. And when we begin to see that, we take away its power over us and we become empowered. And it, that's its worst nightmare, because then it becomes unemployed. So then, of course, as we get closer to shedding light on it, it gets more and more like its darker manifestations come up trying to stop us. But like the thing which is important to understand, instead of getting, sort of hooked by its darker manifestations and thinking, well, I'm really screwed up. No, that's a sign you're on the right path, and, and what I'm pointing out really is, as more and more of us stabilize this realization, shed light on WETIKO, on our complicity in our own victimization, in seeing the dreamlike nature, and connect with each other, with other people who are having that realization, that's when our realization can go viral, because our realization of having, this lucid dream, in a way, in the waking dream, in a way, it's contagious. And that's, that's what I'm really talking about, where we discover that we can actually consciously participate in our own evolutionary process. That's what this is about. It's actually a gift. WETIKO is a living revelation. But if we don't recognize what it's revealing to us, it'll just assume its programmed function of killing us. And every spiritual tradition, I mean, I've written 3 books about it, is pointing at it. And I'm just a modern person, just translating it into a modern psychological spiritual idiom, hopefully that where people can understand it.
What an exciting concept that is. I mean, I'm new to your work, Paul, but it makes absolute sense to me that it sort of explains the idea of synthetic reality and in the way that the drug companies are making synthetic versions of natural remedies. But it also, what's exciting about that concept to me is that it puts the solution into our own hands.
Well, not only do we have the solution, we are the solution. That's the unbelievable thing. It's sort of like in quantum physics, the physicists, it's like they had this magic wand coming down from heaven, and they realized, oh my God, we are in possession of this magic wand, but we didn't even know it, and we don't know how to use it. And so we already see, that's the good news. We already have the solution, and not only do we have it, we are the solution, but we don't know that, and we don't know how to implement it. And you see, and that's why one of the main things I continually get back to, and this is just based on my own personal process, is the profound importance of accessing our creative spirit. because by our nature, we are creative. Like, okay, the greatest protection for WETIKO, to protect us against WETIKO is to remember, like Gurdjieff talks about who we are, is to actually realize our true nature. Well, that's such a cliche. What in the world does that mean? And I point out, well, what is our true nature? Our true nature, by its very nature, is creative. And the more we realize our nature, the more we express ourselves and embody being creative. And the more we embody and express ourselves being creative, the more we deepen our realization of our nature. It becomes a positive feedback loop that creates consciousness, that creates light upon light. And that's why, like I've extensively done so many articles about that the artist, the figure of the creative artist, which is the shaman, by the way, which is the wounded healer, which is all of us in potential. We're all being called. I talk about in my new book that the major archetype activated in the collective unconscious is the shamanic archetype, and that is the storyteller, the dreamer, the creative artist. And to the extent that we individually, collectively step into that, that's where we can, you see, like the thing about the WETIKO, it's a collective psychosis, it's a psychic epidemic, it's a dreamed up phenomena. We are collectively dreaming it up into the world. No one else is doing that. We are all unconsciously co-creating, the WETIKO psychic epidemic. What that means is that when we realize that, we can undream it. That's why my new book is Undreaming WETIKO.
So this could be considered as the sort of true awakening. So you could sort of say, I don't know, like a low-level awakening would just be awakening to that there is something not quite right. I think with what you're speaking about regarding the creativity or the creative impulse in humanity is that to realize that that's what we are and that's what we have and that's the power that we have, possibly the greatest power within this realm at least. That would be the true awakening. Now, it was always said to me when I was in esoteric groups that, and this is kind of hypothetical, that if 100 people, 100 humans were able to truly wake up simultaneously, that our whole reality would change.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether 100 is a particular number or I think it's more just to stress a point.
Yeah, it's a symbolic number. Like in the Bible, they talk about the 144,000, or then there's the 100th monkey phenomena. Or if you want to like bake bread, if there's enough yeast in the dough, it'll rise. It's that idea because we're all connected, through the collective unconscious. And I just want to point out, it's a known fact that psychologically speaking, the greatest poison in the human psyche is unexpressed and repressed creativity. So where people ask me, oh, how this WETIKO idea, it's so abstract, on the one hand, it absolutely underlies the process of addiction and trauma, but how do I find it in myself? Well, then I would invite the person to explore their relationship to their creative process. Are you a creative person? Do you express yourself creatively each and every day? Oh, you actually have a block? Oh, you're stuck? There's an edge there? What's that about? What story have you invested in where you're feeding the resistance and then you're splitting off from your creative nature? You see, and that becomes a self-reinforcing feedback loop that can block a person from connecting with who they are. And then they're unwittingly offering themselves as a minion, for WETIKO. And it's not just me. In the new book, I talk about this Russian philosopher, Berdiev, Nicholas Berdiev, who was very into the second coming, and he was into theology, and he points out that if we just are passively waiting for the second coming, we're only going to be seeing the crucified face of Christ. But if we are actively participating in our own creative process, then by us doing that, we are offering ourselves as an instrument for the second coming to incarnate in our world. And this is also having to do with, like you had mentioned in the intro, in the new book, there's a chapter on Steiner, Rudolf Steiner. Yeah. And he was saying, he's, when all of these guys, Jung was talking about it, Steiner, Henry Corbin, Wilhelm Reich, and I talk about this all throughout my work, that what Steiner was saying was that the greatest event in this time in history, because Steiner was an incredible clairvoyant, was the incarnation of what he calls the etheric Christ. That Christ wasn't going to be incarnating in a human, physical body, but he was incarnating through the collective unconscious of humanity. And he was saying this is the greatest event happening in our world at this moment in time. But he was saying before it can be actualized, we have a direct encounter with the beast, with the radical evil. And that's exactly what's playing out. We are, as God more and more is incarnating, not through one human like he did 2,000 years ago, who was kept pure and spotless. And then Satan, coincidentally arose at exactly the same moment, which is symbolically an expression of how polarized the opposites were 2,000 years ago in the human psyche. Here's Christ embodying the light. Here's his disassociated shadow, Satan, and they're completely separate. Where what Jung was saying is that now there's the Christification of many. Now God is incarnating through the human species, through creaturely man, who partakes of evil and has a shadow. And the closer God gets to incarnating through humanity, the closer a collision with archetypal evil. And that's what happened to me. When one way of describing my whole experience of abuse and awakening and all that was I had a direct, unmediated encounter with archetypal evil, and it completely destroyed my entire family. I haven't had a family for over 20 years, but instead of just completely driving me insane or killing me, somehow I had the grace to keep my heart open and cultivate my awareness and map what was happening and realize, oh my God, what I'm experiencing personally is actually holographically enfolded and informing and giving shape to what's playing out in our world. And for me to realize that was having an expansion of consciousness. And that realization is available to all of us.
Well, could you expand on your understanding of the shamanic archetype?
Cool. Yeah. No, totally. So I think in the new book, the biggest chapter is on shamanism, and I finished it literally weeks before the pandemic. And I was talking about, we as a species are going through this death rebirth. We're descending into the underworld, which is a place of evil and darkness and demons and death and all that stuff. Now, the shaman, how the shamanic archetype gets constellated is through a trauma, through a wounding, through abuse. Because think about it, we're whole, we're all in trauma. I've been screaming for years how in trauma I am. And then we get traumatized. What happens? We split, we dissociate, right? And then that split off part of us, if we don't assimilate it, it develops a seeming autonomy, an independent life or will of its own. In psychology speak, it's called an autonomous complex. Indigenous people call it a demon. That's WETIKO, okay? So the shaman gets traumatized because they split and dissociate. That constellates them going on the shamanic journey via the wings of their creative imagination to find the part of them that's locked back in the amber of time to retrieve their soul, okay? And the idea is, now think about what a shaman does. A shaman is somebody who's so empathic, and say if they're working with a particular client or a community, they will literally take on the illness of the client. What does that mean? Taking on has a double meaning. Taking on means to have it out with, to wrestle with. It also means to take it within themselves. And they actually fall sick. That's the shamanic archetype. They are literally experiencing the sickness that's in the client or in the field or in the community or in the world, but they're experiencing it from inside of themselves. They are realizing it's an inside job. But if they stay sick, then they can't help anybody, then they need a shaman. The idea is that ordeal of falling sick becomes the way through which they even deepen their connection even deeper with their wholeness, with their nature. So by them actually being able to metabolize the sickness and finding their way back to who they actually are, to their nature, energetically, non-locally, that in a way creates that path for the client or the community or the world to also find their way back to their wholeness. So it's very much like an energetic phenomena via the collective unconscious through which we all share. And what I'm pointing out is that WETIKO is a collective psychosis we've all dreamed up, this collective madness, and it's an expression of our madness, and we've been made sick by it. And to the extent that the shamanic archetype is consciously activated in us, and instead of just staying sick, and just making the best of it, we have that be a springboard to even deepen our realization of our nature, then we are actually stepping into being the wounded healer, because the wounded healer is somebody who suffers an incurable wound, but that wound becomes a portal to their creative gifts. So the idea of the shaman, they descend into the underworld, but they then ascend back into the 3D world, and they bear gifts based on their ordeal. Now, I knew nothing about shamanism, and I'm no shaman. I make a joke with my friends, only in my wildest dreams am I a shaman. But the shamanic archetype was activated in me 40 years ago with what happened. And so, I'm just very, very fluent in that whole like dynamic. And it completely has to do, the shaman is the creative artist. They are the dreamer, the storyteller. And we are all being demanded to connect with with the part of us that is the shaman, wounded healer in training. And particularly when we connect with each other and we realize it's not a competition, but if I help you, it helps me because we're not separate. So that's just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So with the advent of technology and this kind of this new world that we're heading towards with technology and things like artificial intelligence, stuff like that, would you describe that as part of what Badaev was trying to say, or Fyodor Dostoevsky? He spoke about the technological experiment into a diabolical sorcery with loss of reason, increase in sanity, and nihilistic kind of mindset. So with this kind of externalized, you could say, types of human functions in terms of consciousness with technology, that could be the sort of, could that be the beast? Could that be the Araman that Steiner spoke of? Could it be the almost like the ultimate WETIKO, which could take us down? It could lead us into entropy, or it could act as evolution.
Yeah. Well, the thing which is interesting, the thing about WETIKO, it's a higher dimensional daimonic energy. And what that means, so it's an archetypal transpersonal energy. It's not just personal. What that means is that it can possess a person. And the person so possessed is oblivious, or it could possess like a whole group of people, or a nation, or a species. And when somebody, you see, so the idea, like when I was mentioning the idea of an autonomous complex, and people can get taken over via their unconscious blind spot, and that's what happened with my father. Like how I know about WETIKO, I studied at the feet of a master, because my father, he was clueless, but he was like the revelation in human form of this inhuman, impersonal, formless disease, this mind virus. And when somebody gets taken over, they become like a robot. They become like an automaton. They're programmed, no creativity programmed in. And that's why, so that's the shadow side of AI, where it can just, like anything, any archetype is like this bipolar, it can good or bad, just like quantum physics, the revelations of quantum physics. Well, is it going to be used for good and the betterment of humanity, or for the imprisonment, or, for evil? And, this is why I'm continually pointing out the importance of compassion, of having an open heart, of really attaining the incredible status of being in indigenous cultures. They call it just being a human being who's connected with their soul, because our nature is love, is compassion. And that is, in a way, kryptonite to the robotic, function, where when somebody gets taken over by WETIKO, they're just, unbeknownst to them, it's like when you're talking to people like that, it's not even like you're talking to a human being, you're talking to an algorithm. There's just conditioned program responses. They're just parroting what they've been programmed to think and say. And, just honestly, I mean, I'm sure the same with you guys, I've been so freaked out, particularly in America, the extent of the brainwashing and the asleepness of people in America, and how they've just, imbibed the Kool-Aid of the mainstream media, and they just parrot what they've been told, and they don't even realize that the perspective that they're expressing is the very perspective that the powers that be, who are, creating all the wars and the evil, that's the perspective they want people to espouse. And so then the question is like, yeah, okay, say any one of us, we awaken to whatever degree we do, and we stabilize that awakening. How do we dream it? How do we intervene in this collective dream we're having, where so many people are seemingly asleep? And that's really an open-ended question. And if I could just say one thing, like in the collected works, Jung talks about, it makes no sense. It's a terrible strategy to preach the light to people whose eyes are blind. And WETIKO is a form of blindness, but it's a peculiar form of blindness that not only is blind, but actually thinks it's sighted. And not only does it think it's sighted, it thinks it's more sighted than people who actually see. So what Jung says is that instead of preaching the light to people whose eyes can't see, what about teaching the art of seeing? And I talk about this in my book. Well, how do you even do that? What does that mean? It's a very open-ended question.
Yeah. Well, that's where the work has to be done. There has to be some kind of conscious labor, or I guess you could class it as a type of sacrifice or suffering, where we have to actually pay attention to subjects like this, as opposed to being distracted or in some kind of disassociation, especially with the mainstream media, with look over here, look over there.
Well, if I could
tactics.
say one thing about that, what you just said, because I see this a lot, there are a lot of really well-intentioned, good, smart, spiritual people who are like, oh, I don't want to put my attention on evil, that's a downer, or I don't want to pay attention to the evil that's playing in the world that makes me depressed. And I get that. And if we focus too much on WETIKO, on evil, then we're feeding it. But here's the thing, if we turn a blind eye towards it and we're avoiding relationship with a part of ourselves, that turning a blind eye, becoming like an ostrich, that is WETIKO. That is WETIKO in action. That's feeding WETIKO. So on the one hand, we don't want to become overly fascinated with evil, but on the other hand, we don't want to turn a blind eye. But what we do want to do, there's a third option, and that is to see how it operates in the world, to see how it operates via our unconscious reactions, to see how it operates within our minds and our projections and our interpretations. And then when we see it, to realize, wait a second, I'm a sovereign being. I get to choose how I invest my attention. What I want to do now that I see WETIKO is I want to invest my attention in creating the world I want to live in. That's kryptonite to WETIKO.
Yeah. Would you say that even if you kind of work on a really small personal level, say you can't be made to feel guilty about something if you don't feel that yourself, or someone can't make you feel bad about something if you don't already feel about yourself like that, so that if you heal that kind of inner pain, and therefore you don't feel triggered by someone else when they could be making you feel bad, then you can then sort of project love towards them and heal your personal relationships. Is that the kind of level on which this works?
Yeah. No, I mean, what you just described, I mean, that's spiritual practice, to the idea, like, say somebody is like accusing us, making us potentially feel guilty, and we're triggered. Well, the idea is, what an incredible opportunity. Instead of putting our attention on them, what about, what's that in me that's just gotten evoked? It's an opportunity for expanding our consciousness. The thing is, the key protection, with reference to WETIKO, is being in touch with our nature. And our nature in, I do Tibetan Buddhist practice. I mean, you can see in back of me. And the idea is our nature is symbolized by this mirror. And the mirror is always available. It's, it's always pure. It's not tainted or stained by the vilest object or reflection, but it's invisible. We can't see it without the reflections.